Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all see me and hear me. And we are here this morning to do a little webinar about responsible lighting in climate change world, about circular economy, and about carbon net zero. So this is obviously something which is a little bit new to me. Hopefully the background and everything doesn't look too weird. It is done from my home and we're all getting used to that at the moment. What I've done is I have muted everyone who is in this group so that you can all see me and we're not going to have people talking over me. But if you want to ask any questions, I will take questions at the end. You can feel free to write them in the chat. There is a chat and I will go back through them and answer any questions which people have. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in who are joining us. So we'll give that a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Hi, Natasha. Thank you very much. Right, I think we may as well get started then. It's after 10 o'clock. So this isn't a particularly long talk. It's one which I presented earlier this year at Surface Design Show. It will be around 20-25 minutes for the talk, and then we can do some questions at the end and see how it goes. So why am I doing this talk? Why am I going to be talking about this topic? I was asked to talk about this. It's something that I have felt quite passionate about. I think all of us do. It's about global warming. It's about tackling that. And over the last year, there's been big changes within policy, within the UK, and also across the world about how people are approaching this. How are we going to keep temperatures down? And really, there's no point talking about design and creativity and creating amazing spaces if we're not going to have them to live in the future. So recently, this has all been discussed. There's been a new policy within the UK, which is carbon net zero by 2050. And how are we going to achieve it? That's a very ambitious goal, and UK were the first to sort of set such an ambitious goal. Other countries have followed since then. And how are we going to get there? And one of the major parts is the energy we use and within the construction industry. So I have put this talk together because I've done quite a lot of research about all of this. I've looked into it. I've attended a number of talks and presentations, and I think that there's going to be huge disruption within our industry. And I am really doing this almost as a public service announcement, sort of saying, this is what we're going to be facing going forwards. This is what we're going to have to deal with. We've got a lot of changes which are going to happen within the industry. And so what we're looking to do is sort of cut carbon neutral, get to a carbon zero position where we're not producing carbon, we're not emitting it into the environment, and to keep temperatures down. And this is going to disrupt the construction industry hugely. So and then I'm talking about this from a lighting perspective, how it's going to affect the lighting industry. If we don't do anything, what we're going to be faced with is effectively famine, extreme weather. There won't be crops growing, there will be storms, there'll be droughts across the whole world. There will be loss of land. We know the Maldives is very vulnerable with sea rises from global warming, and that can be lost, the entire set of islands, and there are others within the world. Entire countries could be lost to sea rises, and we could have loss of life. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people could die if we don't do anything about global warming. So this is why we're approaching doing this carbon net zero by 2050. So there are two initiatives which have really taken off. It's the carbon net zero, and then alongside that, people have really embraced within the last couple of years the idea of a circular economy. The idea of producing products, releasing new products, making new stuff all the time is just not viable anymore. Materials are running out. We won't have enough to put out there into the world. We will need to cut that. And also, that production is adding a huge amount of carbon to the world. It's adding a lot of pollutants and a lot of waste, and we can't really have that anymore. So these two almost go hand in hand. So we'll start by looking at carbon net zero. So the big initiative by the government is we will have net carbon zero by 2050. Okay, so the idea, and within construction, the idea is when you build something, when you have a building, overall, that will be net carbon zero. We will not have lots of emissions or anything like that from it. We will have effectively it be neutral, not going to be having any carbon. What was kind of hidden within that release is that actually they plan to have all new buildings to be carbon net zero by 2030. So we're not just having carbon net zero by 2050, that's all buildings. But for new buildings, it's going to be 2030. Now, this is huge because there are projects which have been started now, which people are working on, and they're going to have to be carbon net zero. And one of the major issues is that this assessment of carbon net zero is done over the whole cycle of a property. So it's done for the supply, the construction, how you use it, and then also the demolition. So you need to be able to assess that whole process, that whole life cycle of that building, and analyze how much carbon has gone into it, and is it going to be net zero, and be able to say, yes, we've designed this to be carbon net zero. It's not just the usage once the building is constructed, it's the carbon which is used in the manufacture of all the materials which is going into it. It is the carbon which it embodies itself and locks away. And then also when you remove it, how much of that are you going to be able to reuse and recycle? And this is a major data analysis which needs to happen on all projects. And I don't think we as an industry, as a lighting industry and the wider construction industry, are at all ready for this. There's going to have to be a lot of work done and analysis of supply chains and how we source materials, how we get materials for properties and bring them into these projects. So from my perspective as a lighting designer, this is going to affect what we're going to be doing, but it's going to affect us all. We're going to need to somehow calculate this data. So here we've got a little chart which I found, and I think this demonstrates quite well what we've got to look at. We've got to look at how the carbon is going into it during the construction process, the products and the materials being used, how we actually build. Then there's the operational energy, which is how much energy it uses during that process, during its use, the energy used for maintenance and repair, getting new products, replacement products, and then also what you can do when you're tearing these buildings down. When they've reached their end of life, there's going to be energy usage to dispose of all these materials. How much of it can you reuse? And really, we're going to have to provide assessments on all of this. We're going to have to analyze how much carbon is going to be used on this. And this is why I've tied in the circular economy as well, because that's very relevant for the end of life and how we use products going forwards at the end of life. Now, as an industry, we're actually reasonably good at knowing about the construction process and carbon, how much carbon goes into certain materials, basic materials at least. We're very good at analysing operational energy usage. We've been doing that, and within the lighting industry, we're very good at that because that's been a massive sales point for LED, the movement towards LEDs, reduction of energy usage. People know how to assess that. With more complex materials like light products and other items, that is not known so much in the construction side. People do not have data on supply chains, how much energy is used in getting those products to site, and that is a more concerning area. But once we've built it, after that, the teardown, the maintenance, the repair, that is something that's not very well known. Now, with the movement towards BIM, usage of that information and the modeling, that will hopefully become a bit easier to assess, but we all know the complexities of working with BIM and how difficult it is to get that data into projects and to make sure it's usable later on. So there is a huge amount of work to be done on that side, and that can actually be a large amount of the carbon which is going to be used in these projects. So tying into this is the circular economy, because we're talking about the end of life, how you're going to reuse products, how you're going to use products going forwards. Can you reuse? Can you recycle? Have you got modular products? And really the entire disruption of the normal economic model of manufacturing. We can't just keep making products. I mean, lighting manufacturers have already discovered major issues now that we have LEDs, because they can't keep making lots and lots of new lights all the time because lights last longer. And so you don't have the disposable lamps that you did before, where you would replace those, you buy, constantly buying new ones. People are not purchasing new fittings all the time. And really it's becoming more and more unacceptable to be forced to purchase entire new lighting fit outs. Why can't we reuse fittings within projects? And so it is disrupting how manufacturers need to approach selling their products. We've seen movements towards lighting as a service, having a subscription providing rental of fittings, which then can be reused or refurbished later on after the end of the life and they're taken back. But it is very disruptive. And with the normal model of having lots of cheap fittings, selling them for a low price, it doesn't really work anymore, that model. It has to be quality going forwards. But the circular economy is very much embracing that idea, reusing, recycling, repurposing fittings. And we've already seen some movement towards that with certain initiatives within the industry. So how can we in the lighting industry play a part? How is lighting going to be affected? There are a number of different elements that we can help to build towards this. It's still very early days. We don't have all the figures. We don't know how to assess the carbon within our supply chains. We don't know how to analyze the end of life, but there are certain things that we can do moving forwards. And so what I put together is a few ideas and a few principles that you could adopt in your projects moving forwards to be prepared for this, because this is where it's going towards in the projects. This is where we're moving in construction. And if you are looking at this now, then you're going to be stood in good stead going forwards for projects. So modularity. The idea of modularity is something which has come in already. The Eco Design Initiative within the EU has embraced the idea that there should be modularity in fittings. Having completely all-in-one built together fittings is not really going to be okay, because you can't replace faulty parts. We know that LEDs last for a very long time, but actually it can be things like drivers or certain components within the fitting which fail. And if they fail and they can't be replaced, then you're wasting those LEDs, which are perfectly functional. So the idea of modularity, the benefit of it is that you're only going to replace the faulty parts in a product. You're only going to have to replace one or two components, and that's much better because then you're not getting the waste. You're going to be able to take those parts out. You can add in new pieces. You can reuse fittings and components. So if you can replace certain parts, if you can have end of life, but you could repurpose, say, drivers from light fittings which have been removed, or the lamps which are going into the products, you can use them again in different products. This way you can actually reuse those components. A lot of these items, if they're well built, will last for a very long time. If we're putting them into commercial settings and they're only going to be in the fit out for a year or two and then it shuts, you could then retake those fittings and reuse them elsewhere. So having modularity is really helpful. It allows you to recycle as well. There's a lot of components, a lot of materials within products which could be recycled. Obviously, there are very complex build-ups on circuit boards, but casings, aluminium extrusions for housing LED strips and LED components could all be recycled. And if it's not modular, you're going to be throwing away and wasting a huge amount of material. As I mentioned already, there's the Eco Design Directive within the industry. This is guidance. So the EU is demanding, and I believe that the UK will follow this as well. I find it difficult to believe that we won't comply because we have to have some sort of similarity to how we design fittings and supply fittings, because the UK is going to want to supply to the EU, and we purchase a huge amount of lighting from the EU and use it within the UK. So the Eco Design Directive, it dictates that the driver, the body and the lamp should all be separate and they should be replaceable. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a standardized process, but they're saying that it should be possible for the manufacturer to provide replacements of items within those components. So if you want to replace the lamp part of it, the body and the driver should remain. And that is currently going through legislation, will probably be passed this year. And so that is moving towards the idea of modularity. There's also some interesting projects out there, such as the Realit project, which is spearheaded by Michael Grubb's studio, which is a lighting design studio. What they're saying is that if you have leftover products from projects, if there are items which haven't been used, they, within the Realit project, will take those and see if they can provide them to other projects, whether they're non-profits, charitable projects, and use those components. They will also take unused products and see if they can put them on projects. I think it's a really good idea, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this moving forwards. Manufacturers are obviously going to have a huge challenge because they have to provide modularity. They're going to have to see how they can use their products, how they can have a different model almost, because they're not going to be able to just continue to manufacture lots of new products. Because they're going to have to provide replacements, there's an entire system that they're going to need to set up, entire environment to provide these replacement components. So that's one area which we're moving forwards on at the moment. The modularity also enables you at the end of life of a project, it can provide offset for carbon savings. If you can turn around and say at the end of life of a project, when it's been torn down, everything's been stripped out, that 80% of that product could be reused or recycled. If you could remove all the aluminium extrusion from some LED strips and recycle that, which is a material which is very easy to recycle, then you will then be able to offset those carbon savings into your overall figure for carbon net zero. So next, what we'll do is we'll talk about life. This is obviously a complex area. One of the huge benefits of LEDs is that they last a very long time. So they can go on for a very long time. You're not going to have to buy lots of replacement products. How can we look at life going forwards? It is very much the old adage of buy cheap, buy twice. If you're going to be buying products which are cheap, if you have contractors who are specifying products in which are maybe not as good a quality as what you've put on your specification, one of the ways that this is going to really be highlighted within projects going forwards is you are going to have to provide analysis of the maintenance of a project. How long are those products going to last? Now, people are going to have to provide evidence of the life of their products, which is very complex with LEDs and their components. But at some point, it is going to be demanded on projects that we want to know the maintenance on it. How often are we going to have to replace these? And the cheaper products are going to have to provide that evidence when they're assessed on projects. And if you're having to buy 2 or 3, then the carbon usage of those is going to be huge within a project. If you're having to purchase lots of products into a project as it's into a building which has already been constructed, you need to factor in the supply chains, the carbon impact of each of those products being shipped from around the world to be brought into projects. So this is one way that will actually be able to show beyond price, actually it's worth investing, getting a better quality product, getting something which is going to last longer, and have something which is going to almost outlive the building and could be recycled and reused. So it's very much a case of that. There's also the expense of the replacement that's going to have to be assessed as part of a project. And it's both the cost of it and the carbon cost, which I mentioned. Like, you've got to ship all these extra items in there. You've got to have the work. And this is something which hopefully the fact that we have to go and get all this extra data to prove that a building is going to be carbon net zero, this will start to become much more apparent to clients. Lighting control is a way that we can help with projects, help with the carbon usage. We know all of this already. We've been doing this for a long time. Dimming reduces energy usage. By providing a good lighting control system, you could say, right, we could save 30 to 50% on the carbon usage going forwards, which will have an impact at how we go use that. Using sensors, motion sensors to reduce energy usage within a space. This is already listed out within the building regulations. If you're doing an office space, you're given guidance on how to create different scenarios for use for the control of the lighting. And this will become much more relevant in the future because it's going to be factored into the carbon usage figures and achieving carbon net zero. So that's something that's going to go forward. Also, what we're doing is extending the life of the fittings. If you tie together your lighting specification with your lighting control specification, you can then show that you could extend your life of your fittings by maybe 50%. If you can extend that life, you could outlive the life of the project, in which case you're not going to have to deal with buying replacements in and the carbon impact of having to fit and purchase those replacements. So that is going to be another area which is going to be affected and you're going to have to analyze, but it has a huge amount of potential to show that it's worth putting in a good lighting control system for projects. And finally, there's design. How can we do something with design? What we're looking at as designers, we're going to have to consider very much the whole life plan. Now, whether you're an architect, interior designer, lighting designer, we already can think about this. When we're doing a project, we are going to think about what it's going to be like after we've left the job, how it's going to look, how we're going to see that entire space. And the whole life plan is going to become much more relevant because now we have to provide assessments and analysis over the whole life of the project. This just means that what we do inherently as designers is actually going to become much more relevant and much more apparent to clients that this is something that's required. So I don't actually look at this assessment and data gathering and necessity to prove that it's going to be carbon net zero as a flaw. I feel that actually it's just going to lead to us being able to show that good design is actually what helps with all of this. We are going to have to provide assessment of carbon offset and the potential of products. We're going to start needing to provide that information in the design process. We're going to look at the materials, what we're choosing, where we're sourcing from, and that's going to become a factor in our designs. And this is not just lighting, this is across the entire construction industry. We're going to have to start assessing all of this. As lighting designers, we're going to have to provide assessments of that carbon offset, of how much carbon those potential products have. As I said, at the moment, the industry provides no information on this, so we're a bit stuck, but it's something that going forwards, I can see becoming a standard piece of information that we're going to have to provide. As I said, I think good design, intelligent design is going to lead to the reduction of energy use. Having a good design done on a project means that you will use less lighting, less power, and so it'll be in the right places, which will mean you're reducing the amount of energy usage. So there is a huge benefit to getting good design, as we all know. And also it's about reduction of liability from the clients. Obviously, we're all familiar working on projects. We have pressure from budgets, from developers, from clients. They don't want to spend lots and lots of money, and we're often there fighting for quality against people who are fighting to reduce the cost. One of the things that has become apparent with this carbon net zero, which was very interesting, is the pressure that's coming from investors to actually show that they're complying and they're looking forward in the future. So you have certain huge investment companies who are now starting to require the idea of an environmental design, of how you're reducing carbon usage. The reason that they're doing this is they're looking into the future. They're looking 10, 15, 20 years down the line, when you have large corporate clients who have a building, and at that point they might be getting hit with penalties because it is not carbon net zero, that it is using too much energy, that the tax on the energy that it's using is increasing. And those are unforeseen costs in their investment. It's affecting their profit line. And eventually they're going to go back down the chain and say, well, you should have foreseen this. You're liable for these costs. So clients, large investors and developers are going to have to look at their projects and say, how am I covering myself? How am I going to be safe from being accused of not producing a building which is suitable for the future? And you'll have large institutional investors who will be looking to cover themselves. So they won't want to invest money in large development projects, which are potentially going to have lots of hidden costs in the future because it hasn't been designed with the idea of carbon net zero and reduction of carbon in the future, which could lead to potential additional costs, because their shareholders could potentially turn around and say, well, you haven't actually invested properly, you haven't done your due diligence on this project, and so we are going to come for you. And so there is a lot of reduction in liability, and that is starting to filter through from a very high level, and enforcing the fact that it's not just about cut the costs, it's about cutting the costs, but also making sure they're covered from any future potential accusations of not considering these elements later on. So that was my talk about carbon net zero. I hope you found that useful. It gives you a little overview of the future of where I think we're going to have to look within construction and how we're going to have to do work, what we're going to have to assess going forwards. This is obviously all early days. I have kind of done it. I don't know everything. I'm just a lighting designer, but this is something that I've become very aware of and that I will be looking to make sure that I stay abreast of, because it is going to affect our industry and all of us. Anyone who's designing a building, who's providing items for a building, is going to have to start factoring this in. We need to know our entire supply chains. We need to know our usage. We need to provide evidence that we've assessed all of this as part of a design. And this is going to be a very complex, but also quite an exciting change within the industry. And I think it has the potential to be good as well. This is obviously something quite new. This is my first webinar to host here. What I am planning on doing is moving forwards, we're going to do some weekly ones, and I'm going to do it every Thursday at 10 a.m. We're going to sit down. I'm going to present on certain topics. So if you are interested, we'll be sending out some information. The plan for the next few weeks, next week, I'm going to do one on lighting controls. And this is going to be from a lighting designer's perspective, how to actually make sure that they deliver what we all know that they can. But the actual practicalities, when you're dealing with them on projects, when you're specifying them, when you're working with suppliers, how to make sure the client actually gets a lighting control which works. On the 16th, we're going to do some basics of lighting, so color rendering and color temperature. I'm just going to go over some very basic elements, provide some information which I have found in the past when I've presented it to interior designers and architects, it's been very eye-opening. It's made them aware of certain choices that they now have to make on projects. So please come along to that. And then on the 23rd, I'm going to do an open Q&A. So I'm just going to sit here, and if people have questions, they can submit questions before or ask questions in it, and just ask me about lighting, whatever people want to come up with. If any of you have any ideas of talks or anything you would like to hear about, please do message me. I would love to have some topics to talk on. So please do let me know. But thank you very much.